Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at company culture, and we're going to be looking at it through the lens of the book Rework. This book really throws out the traditional rule book on building a great company culture, and I'm excited to talk through some of the ideas with you.
It's a book that definitely challenges a lot of assumptions about building a thriving company culture.
Yeah, for example, the book even suggests that you don't actually create a company culture, it creates itself. Like, how does that even work?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Have you ever, walked into a company and just felt a certain vibe?
Yeah.
That's the culture. And it's not something that is, written down in a mission statement.
Mhm.
It's the result of everyday actions and behaviors of the people who work there. It's like patina.
Patina. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, patina is that beautiful layer that develops on surfaces like copper or bronze over time.
Right.
It comes from being exposed to the elements being used, being touched. Rework makes this really interesting point that culture is similar. It's the character that a company develops over time. It's not manufactured, it's earned.
So it's less about like saying we have a great culture and more about actually demonstrating it through consistent actions, right?
Exactly. Imagine trying to artificially create patina on a brand new penny. It just wouldn't be authentic. Real culture comes from the accumulation of small, everyday decisions and actions. Think about how information is shared, how feedback is given and received, how successes are celebrated, even how failures are handled, right?
Okay, this is making me think about some companies I know that are known for their really strong cultures, like Zappos, for example. Everyone always raves about their customer service. So I'm guessing that's a result of their patina.
It's a great example. Zappos empowers their employees to go above and beyond for customers, and they reward those behaviors. That focus on customer experience becomes woven into the fabric of the company. Or consider Google, especially in its early days. They cultivated a culture of innovation by encouraging employees to experiment and pursue their own ideas. These aren't just empty slogans. They're reflected in the company's actions and policies.
So let's say you're starting a company or even building a new team from scratch. What would be that like one action that you would prioritize to set the right tone from the very beginning, to start building that positive patina?
That's a great question. I think for me it would be radical transparency, openly sharing information, both the good and the bad, with your team. This builds trust, and it makes people feel like they're truly part of the process. It sets the stage for honest communication and collaboration, which are essential for a healthy culture.
Transparency breeds trust. I can see that. Now, building on this idea of action over words, rework also suggests that in those early stages of a company, decisions should be viewed as temporary.
Yeah, that's right. The book really emphasizes that you shouldn't get bogged down in trying to make perfect long-term decisions right out of the gate.
So it's better to just start moving and then adjust course as needed. Like, don't spend weeks agonizing over like a 5-year plan on day one, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially for smaller companies or startups, this agility is a huge advantage.
I mean, it's so tempting to overthink things when you're starting out, but honestly, imagine a company like making a 5-year dress code policy on day one. It just seems absurd.
It is. You have to be adaptable. Circumstances change, markets shift, and your understanding of your own business evolves. It's much more effective to make a decision, even if it's not perfect,
Hmm.
and then adjust it as you learn and grow.
Yeah, that don't overthink it mentality can really be applied to so many aspects of life, not just starting a company. So, what advice would you give to someone trying to bring this approach to their own work or projects?
I'd say accept that you don't need all the answers up front.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to make a decision and run with it. And, be willing to adapt and learn along the way.
Yeah.
Sometimes taking that first step is more important than waiting for the perfect plan.
And that brings us to another like big myth that rework tackles head on. The allure of the rock star employee.
Ah, yes. The idea that you need to assemble a team of superstars to guarantee success.
Right. The book kind of throws a wrench in that whole concept, suggesting that the environment actually trumps individual talent when it comes to creating consistently great work.
Think about it this way. You could have the most brilliant musician in the world, but if you put them in a terrible recording studio with cheap instruments, they're not going to sound their best, are they?
No.
The same goes for a workplace. You can have a team full of talented individuals, but if the environment is stifling, if there's no trust, no autonomy, they're not going to reach their full potential.
So instead of chasing that elusive rock star, maybe we should be focusing on creating a rock star environment.
Exactly. Foster a culture where people feel empowered, supported, and challenged to do their best work. That's where the magic happens.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Are there ever situations where chasing after a superstar is the right move? Like, for example, in highly specialized fields.
That's a good point. There may be cases where specific expertise is absolutely critical, like in cutting-edge research or highly technical fields, but even then, the environment still plays a crucial role. A negative or stifling work environment can drive away even the most talented person.
So it seems like the environment really does set the stage, regardless. It makes me wonder, what aspects of our work environment bring out the best in us? Like for our listeners out there, think about it. Is it the freedom to experiment? Is it the support of your colleagues? Is it the trust your manager places in you? What makes you thrive?
Those are all great examples.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how the environment can either elevate or stifle someone's ability to do their best work.
Speaking of things that can like make or break a positive work environment, Rework has some pretty strong opinions about treating adults like adults.
Absolutely. The book really takes aim at micromanagement and the high cost of distrusting employees.
Like, it uses the example of blocking social media at work. Is that really saving companies money, or is it just creating resentment and stifling creativity?
It's a classic case of focusing on presenteeism over productivity.
Mhm.
Just because someone is physically present at their desk doesn't mean they're mentally engaged and doing their best work. You can't force productivity by restricting access to things like social media.
And haven't studies actually shown that allowing people to have like a little bit of divergent thinking time, like browsing social media or taking breaks,
Mhm.
that it can actually boost creativity and problem solving?
Exactly. Trying to control every minute of an employee's day is not only counterproductive, but it also sends a message of distrust. It essentially says, we don't trust you to manage your own time and make responsible decisions. And that lack of trust can be incredibly demotivating. It's like treating adults like children, which is a recipe for disaster.
I love that point. It's making me think back to all those ridiculous rules I've encountered in past workplaces. It's almost like some companies thrive on creating rules for the sake of having rules, even if they don't make any sense.
It's scar tissue, as Rework calls it. Overreactions to incidents that lead to unnecessary policies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, speaking of respecting employees' time and autonomy, let's move on to what Rework has to say about work-life balance and efficiency. This is something I think a lot of us struggle with, especially in today's always connected world.
The book really challenges that always-on mentality. It argues that constantly being plugged in isn't sustainable or even productive in the long run. We're humans, not machines.
Right. I actually remember reading this one chapter where it suggested that sometimes having less time at work can actually lead to better work.
Yeah.
And honestly, my mind was blown. It seemed so counterintuitive, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense.
When you have limited time, you're forced to focus on what truly matters. You become incredibly efficient at prioritizing tasks. And there's less room for distractions or busy work.
It's like Parkinson's law in action, right? Work expands to fill the time allotted. Give yourself 8 hours to complete a task, and it'll take 8 hours. Give yourself 4, and you'll find a way to get it done in 4.
Precisely. It's about understanding the psychology of productivity. When you have unlimited time, it's easy to fall into the trap of procrastination or perfectionism.
This is all so relevant to our listeners, no matter what kind of work they do or where they are in their careers. So let me ask you this. How can someone start building better boundaries for work-life balance? Like, what are some practical steps they can take?
Well, it starts with recognizing that boundaries are crucial for both your mental health and your productivity. It might involve setting clear work hours and sticking to them, learning to say no to additional commitments or projects when you're already stretched thin, even establishing designated no-work zones in your home or during specific times of day. It's about being intentional with your time and energy and recognizing that rest and rejuvenation are just as important as work.
Boundaries are about respecting yourself and your time. And it sounds like Rework takes that concept very seriously. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about policies, or rather, avoiding premature ones. This is a concept that Rework calls organizational scar tissue, right?
That's right. The book uses this analogy to describe how policies often arise as overreactions to isolated incidents.
Like someone showing up to work in shorts one day and suddenly the entire company is subjected to a 10-page dress code.
Exactly. Rework argues that policies should be a last resort, not a first response. They should only be implemented when absolutely necessary to address repeated problems, not one-off situations.
It reminds me of those ridiculous rules you sometimes hear about in companies. Like, no personal items on your desk, no talking in the break room. It's like some organizations thrive on control and rigidity, even if it stifles creativity and makes people feel like they're in a prison.
The danger of these excessive policies is that they create a culture of fear and compliance, rather than trust and empowerment. And that's not exactly conducive to a thriving and innovative work environment.
So I have a question for our listeners. Have you ever encountered a ridiculous rule at work that seemed to exist just because? The kind that makes you scratch your head and wonder who in the world thought it was a good idea.
We've all been there. It's important to question those rules and advocate for more sensible approaches, and rework certainly encourages that.
Now let's talk about communication. Rework emphasizes the importance of companies sounding like themselves. What exactly does that mean?
It means ditching the overly formal corporate jargon and being genuine and relatable in your communication, both internally and externally.
I love that. It's about stripping away the pretense and just being real, whether you're talking to customers, employees, or anyone else.
It's about connecting with people on a human level, and that's something Rework emphasizes throughout the book. Now, I have to ask you about one of the most surprising insights from Rework, the danger of certain four-letter words. When I first read that section, I thought, wait, are we talking about those four-letter words?
I had the same reaction. But it turns out we're talking about words like need, must, can't, and ASAP. Words that, on the surface, seem perfectly harmless, even essential in a work environment.
Right. But Rework argues that these words can be surprisingly detrimental to communication and collaboration. Why? Because they create absolutes, they eliminate nuance, and they leave no room for discussion or alternative perspectives.
So instead of encouraging collaboration, they can actually create roadblocks and tension.
Exactly. Let me give you an example. Imagine receiving an email that says, "We need this feature added ASAP. We can't launch without it. Everybody wants it. It must be done fast." How does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, my anxiety just went through the roof. And secondly, it makes me feel like I'm being dictated to rather than being part of a team.
Right. It's full of demands and assumptions. It leaves no room for discussion about priorities, feasibility, or alternative solutions.
So what's a better way to phrase that kind of request?
Instead of saying, "We need this feature added ASAP," you can say something like, "It would be fantastic to include this feature in the upcoming launch. What do you think is a realistic time frame for getting this done?"
It's amazing how a few simple word swaps can completely change the tone and encourage a more collaborative approach.
It's about recognizing the power of language and how even subtle changes can have a big impact on how we communicate and work together.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up part one of our deep dive into rework. We've already covered so much ground, from the idea of culture as patina to the myth of rock stars, and the importance of treating employees like, well, adults. We also talked about the dangers of premature policies, the power of clear communication, and the surprising impact of those four-letter words we often take for granted.
Rework really challenges us to rethink our assumptions about work, productivity, and company culture. And this is just the beginning.
Exactly. Stay tuned for part two of our deep dive into rework, where we'll explore even more insights into building a thriving company culture. See you soon.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Rework.
As we're going through all this, one thing that keeps coming back to me is that rework seems to really emphasize this idea of action over words. Like, it's not enough to talk about having a great company culture. You actually have to live it, right?
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings us to another really bold idea from the book, and that is the importance of sending people home at 5.
Wait, sending people home at 5. But hold on, isn't the ideal employee the one who's always hustling, always available, pulling all-nighters if they have to?
That's kind of the image we've always had, right? But Rework actually challenges that whole notion. It says that having a company full of workaholics isn't necessarily the recipe for success. In fact, it might even be masking inefficiencies
Right.
and perpetuating this myth that long hours are the only path to achievement.
So what's the alternative then? I mean, are we talking about like a 4-hour work week?
Not necessarily. It's more about recognizing that people have lives outside of work and respecting those boundaries. Actually encouraging people to detach and recharge this can lead to better, more focused work overall.
I've definitely noticed that when I have limited time for a task, I tend to be much more efficient. It's that pressure cooker effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you have a deadline looming, you suddenly find a way to prioritize and eliminate all those distractions. You're laser focused on getting the job done.
So really what rework is suggesting is that we need to rethink what it even means to be productive, right? It's not about just being chained to your desk for endless hours. It's about being intentional with your time and delivering high-quality work within reasonable boundaries.
And that in turn can lead to a happier and more balanced workforce, which, ultimately benefits everyone.
Now, there's another phrase from Rework that really stuck with me. Don't scar on the first cut. What does that even mean in the context of company culture?
It's all about avoiding that knee-jerk reaction to create a policy every single time something goes wrong.
Ah, yes, the infamous someone wore shorts to work, so now we need a 10-page dress code scenario.
Precisely. Rework argues that policy should be a last resort, not a first response. They should only be implemented to address, issues that happen repeatedly, not one-off situations.
So instead of reaching for the policy handbook every time someone makes a mistake, what's a more effective approach?
Direct communication. If someone steps out of line, address it with that individual directly,
Makes sense.
rather than punishing everyone with a new rule.
Right. So it's about treating people like responsible adults, not children who need constant supervision and a rule for everything, which, as we talked about earlier, really aligns with Rework's emphasis on, respecting employees' autonomy.
Absolutely. It's about fostering a culture of trust and accountability, rather than fear and micromanagement.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about communication. It's obviously a crucial part of any company culture, and Rework definitely has some pretty strong opinions about how companies should communicate both internally and externally.
The book advocates for what he calls sounding like you. Essentially, it means being authentic and relatable in your communication,
Hmm.
rather than trying to sound overly formal or corporate.
I love that. It's about stripping away all that jargon and stuffy language and just being real.
Exactly. It's about talking to customers and employees like they're actual human beings, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm guessing this applies to like all forms of communication, right? From emails and presentations to social media posts, even how you answer the phone.
Absolutely. It's about creating this consistent voice that reflects your company's values and personality, a voice that people can connect with and trust.
Speaking of connecting with people, I have to ask about one of the most surprising and thought-provoking points in Rework, and that is the danger of certain four-letter words.
Hmm.
I distinctly remember reading that section and thinking, wait, are they talking about those four-letter words?
I had the exact same thought. But no, we're not talking about profanity. Rework is referring to words like need, must, can't, and ASAP. Words that on the surface seem perfectly harmless, even essential in a work environment.
Right. But as I recall, the book makes a pretty strong case that these words can actually be quite detrimental to communication and collaboration. So why is that?
Well, they tend to create absolutes, right?
Yeah.
And eliminate nuance. They leave very little room for discussion or alternative perspectives. They can come across as demanding and inflexible, which can damage relationships and create unnecessary conflict.
It's funny how we use these words all the time without even really realizing the impact they might be having.
It's a subtle but incredibly powerful point that Rework is making. The book encourages us to be more mindful of our language and consider alternative ways to express those same ideas.
So for instance, instead of saying we need this feature added ASA,
Yeah.
you could say something like, it would be great to include this feature in the upcoming launch. What's a realistic time frame for getting this done?
Exactly. By rephrasing the request in a more collaborative and open-ended way, you're much more likely to get a positive response and avoid any unnecessary tension.
It's such a simple yet effective shift in mindset. It's about approaching communication as a partnership rather than a dictatorship.
And that, in turn, fosters a more positive and productive work environment.
Now, Rework also cautions against premature scaling. So what's the thinking behind that?
Well, the authors believe that a lot of companies make the mistake of trying to grow too quickly, too soon. They focus on scaling their operations before they've actually validated their product or service
Okay.
and established a solid foundation.
So it's like putting the cart before the horse.
Exactly. Rework suggests it's better to start small, focus on building a really great product or service that people truly love, and then scale gradually as demand increases.
So it's about prioritizing quality over quantity in those early stages.
Absolutely. It's about proving your concept, building a loyal customer base, and refining your processes before you start expanding rapidly.
This is making me think about all those cautionary tales we hear about startups that grew too quickly and then just imploded because they simply couldn't handle the demand.
Yeah. Rework really stresses that slow and steady wins the race, you know. It's about building a sustainable business, not chasing fleeting hype.
Right. It's about focusing on what truly matters, creating a great product or service that people will love and that will stand the test of time.
Precisely. And that kind of brings us to another intriguing concept from rework, the idea of embracing constraints.
Constraints. You mean limitations. That doesn't sound very appealing.
I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But rework argues that constraints can actually be a source of creativity and innovation. When you have limited resources, time, or budget, you're often forced to think outside the box and come up with really clever solutions.
It's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly. When you have unlimited resources, it can be tempting to overthink things, overcomplicate things, and lose sight of what's truly important.
I can see that. It's like having a blank canvas that's so big that you're just paralyzed by indecision. You don't even know where to begin.
Rework encourages us to kind of see limitations as opportunities to become more resourceful, more creative, and more efficient.
So whether you're working on a personal project or leading a team at work, constraints might actually be your secret weapon.
That's a great way to put it. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes less is more. Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive into rework, I have a question for our listeners. Yeah. What's one constraint you're currently facing in your work or personal life? And how can you maybe turn that constraint into an advantage? It's a question worth pondering.
I love that. We'll be back soon to wrap up our exploration of rework and its unconventional wisdom for building a thriving company culture. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into rework. It's been a wild ride exploring all these unconventional ideas about how to build a truly great company culture. As we're wrapping up here, what stands out to you the most from this book?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is that rework really encourages a mindset shift. It's like a departure from the traditional way of thinking about work and success.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like the authors are giving us permission to break free from all those old rules and assumptions that we've always taken for granted.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the biggest rules that they encourage us to break is this pursuit of perfection.
Ah, yes, the progress over perfection mantra.
That's it. Rework argues that perfection is often this elusive goal that can actually hinder progress. Like sometimes it's better to just get something out there, whether it's a product, a project, whatever it might be, even if it's not perfect, and then iterate and improve based on real-world feedback.
Yeah. It's like that saying, done is better than perfect.
Mm.
I'm a recovering perfectionist myself, so this is an idea that really resonates with me. It's a good reminder that it's okay to make mistakes and to learn as you go. You don't have to have it all figured out from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Rework encourages us to embrace the iterative process and to view failure as an opportunity for learning and growth, not something to be feared.
Now, there's another idea that really intrigued me, the concept of underdoing the competition.
Ah, yes. This is one of my favorite ideas from the book. It's about focusing on your strengths and doing a few things exceptionally well,
Okay.
rather than trying to be everything to everyone. It's about recognizing that you don't have to match your competitors, like feature for feature or dollar for dollar to succeed.
So it's about finding your niche and becoming a master of it rather than trying to be a jack of all trades.
Precisely. Rework argues that spreading yourself too thin can actually lead to mediocrity. So instead, focus on what you do best and differentiate yourself from the competition that way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this in terms of like products or services. It's about finding that unique value proposition and emphasizing that rather than getting caught up in this like feature war with your competitors.
Exactly. Rework even suggests that you can get an advantage by intentionally underdoing the competition in certain areas.
Oh, really? Can you give an example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're a software company and you're developing a new productivity app.
Okay.
Instead of trying to match your competitors' extensive feature set, you could focus on just a few core features and then make those features incredibly user-friendly and intuitive.
Got it. So you're focusing on quality and ease of use over quantity of features.
Exactly. You're finding a way to stand out by doing less, but doing it exceptionally well.
It's a powerful reminder that simplicity and focus can be way more effective than complexity and trying to be all things to all people. Now, as we wrap up our exploration of rework, I want to touch on one final point that really resonated with me. And that is the importance of building a culture of learning.
The culture of learning. Yeah, what does that even look like in a practical sense?
Right.
Well, it means creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks, to experiment, to challenge the status quo. It's about embracing a growth mindset where mistakes are seen as opportunities for learning and improvement.
So instead of punishing failure, you're actually encouraging it as a necessary part of the growth process.
Exactly. It's about fostering curiosity and a willingness to try new things. Rework argues that complacency is the enemy of progress. The companies that are constantly learning and adapting are the ones that will thrive in the long run.
And that applies not only to companies, but also to individuals as well, right?
Absolutely. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a team leader, or just someone who's looking to grow and develop in your career, embrace that mindset of continuous learning. Stay curious, ask questions, and never stop exploring new ideas.
It's been such a rewarding experience exploring the unconventional wisdom of rework with you. We've covered so much ground, from the importance of action over words to the power of embracing constraints, underdoing the competition, and so much more.
We really have. We've touched on so many valuable lessons, like the importance of progress over perfection, building a culture of trust and autonomy, and fostering clear, authentic communication.
If you're looking to challenge your assumptions about company culture and discover some fresh, unconventional approaches, I highly recommend giving Rework a read.
It's a book that will make you think differently, question the status quo, and inspire you to build something truly remarkable.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.